Hello and welcome to another session with the Cyber Professor. Today we will continue our discussion on operating systems. As part of our course map, we have identified 9 different sections of the course that we will be covering. Number 4 is System Security and Management. This particular session will cover system security. Chapter 11 is the chapter in your textbook that covers system security in the operating systems. There are 4 objectives that we have for today. The first one is the effect security has on the operating system and system performance. The second one is security threats and how they differ. The third one is levels of security to be implemented. And the fourth one is the education and ethical practices in system security. Before we touch on the different components of operating system security, let us talk about security life cycle. There are 5 different steps in the security life cycle. The first one being the asset inventory and classification. The security life cycle is a process, dynamic process that any entity or organization needs to undertake to make sure their environment is secure. The first step in this life cycle is the identification and inventory of all the assets that are part of the organization. By assets, we are defining the hardware in the form of server, laptops, desktops, mobile devices, the software in the form of the operating system, applications, and utilities that are used in the organization, and finally the data that is stored and maintained by the organization. Those 3 components, hardware, software, and data, are part of the assets that belong to a company. In the software category, we identify the operating system, which is the topic of our course. So first we need to do a full inventory of all the assets, and by that I mean identify every single hardware device, software device, including the many different flavors of operating systems that are in use in our organization, and the data that is stored in our organization, and put all of that information into a master database that is called the Asset Management Database. In that database, we have a list of everything that the company owns. And then we have the opportunity to classify each of those assets by the level of criticality or importance that it has for our organization. If it is an asset that maintains critical data, secure data for our organization, the classification will be very high for that particular asset. If it is an asset that is not meant to store any important information or critical or private or confidential information for our company, the classification for that particular asset may be very low. The next step in the life cycle is the identification of threats. Security threats are defined as any particular external or internal agent that places the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of our assets at risk. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability are the 3 components of the CIA triad, security triad. And those cannot be put at risk for any reason. Otherwise, our assets, including the data, will be at risk. The identification of threats includes a full inventory of any particular agent, again, external or internal, that may place our assets at risk. We need to create a comprehensive list of all threats that we believe may be identified that will put the security of our assets at risk. Examples are even natural disasters like fire or flooding of our building, our company building, which will place all of the assets, the hardware assets, at risk. within our company. Cyber attacks are also another threat for our assets in the form of agents or entities external to our organization trying to break into the security of our data, our assets, our software. Those are considered cyber attacks. And unintentional loss of data in the form of employees that may, by mistake, place our data at risk and the risk of being stolen by people that are not part of the organization. The next step in the security lifecycle is the vulnerability assessment. It is a formal process that companies need to undertake in order to identify any type of vulnerability that comes with the specific assets that are part of the company. By that I mean, if the company is using operating systems, for example, as part of the software assets that are prone to cyber attacks, that are not properly patched because the vendor may not provide those patches on a timely manner, then the vulnerability for that particular operating system will be high. The same applies with applications, software applications that may be legacy applications that were in use many years ago, and that our company may not have been able to upgrade on a timely manner. The fact that we are using legacy applications creates a significant vulnerability, security vulnerability for our company. A vulnerability is defined as a weakness in either hardware, software, or data protection controls that we may have in our environment. Any weakness can be exploited in the form of threats that place our asset at risk. Risk management is the next step of the life cycle, the security life cycle, and that involves the identification of the likelihood, meaning the probability, and the impact of any threat taking advantage of the vulnerabilities that are specific to the assets in our organization. That is the risk management process. It is a formal process that companies need to undertake in order to identify and classify the level of risk that they are under for the security of their assets. And again, it is a comparison of the threats against the vulnerabilities and the likelihood of those threats taking advantage of the vulnerabilities in our systems becoming a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability for our assets. So that risk management process has the outcome of creating a list of risks that our company is under in the form of high risks, medium risks, and low risks that we need to protect against. And the way to protect against those risks in order to keep our assets secure is by the implementation of the last step of the life cycle, which is the implementation of security controls. Security controls can be in the form of software that we purchase to protect our systems. Examples of those are the antivirus software that we may place on all of our assets in our company to protect them against viruses and malware. It can also be major equipment like firewalls that are designed to protect our systems from unauthorized access, also protecting them from external agents accessing data that they are not supposed to access, or sections of our environments that are highly secure. Security controls can also include the training that we offer to employees of our company. The training in the form of making sure that they do not fall to social engineering attacks that typically come in the form of phishing emails that arrive in their company email accounts that are prompting our employees to give up data, to give up secrets, company secrets that could open the door to cyber attacks. training our employees against those phishing emails is an important security control. Security controls can be software or hardware that we purchase, and by that I mean tools that we purchase. It can also be user training, and it can also be policies and procedures, formal, written policy and procedure documents that our company develops in order to make sure that we have an organized and comprehensive process to manage any hardware, software, or data that is part of our organization. So security controls are not only software and hardware that we buy. Remember, security controls also include user training, and it also includes the creation of policies and procedures in written form that mandate how our company will behave. And this cycle repeats itself. The reason being, assets will change across many years, and we need to continue dynamically populating the asset inventory database, new assets that our company may be purchasing, and classifying them on a regular basis. So we continue the life cycle all over again from the beginning as time goes by. Now we specifically get into the security of the operating system. One of the major challenges that technology professionals have is finding a healthy balance between functionality and security. It is typically seen as the battle between functionality versus security. Computing systems have conflicting and competing needs. On one hand, developers create new applications, new devices to provide functionality and usability to people in general. And that includes operating system features that are deployed by the major software vendors like Microsoft. Microsoft Windows operating system has many features that are created to enhance the functionality and usability of the operating system. Shortcuts, ways of giving users the ability to do things in a faster and better way within the operating system, within the Windows operating system, is part of the effort of creating additional functionality and give that functionality to you, the user. However, many of those functionality enhancements come with severe security flaws, and finding the balance between giving more functionality, making things better as far as the user experience, has to take into account the security implications of that functionality that we are giving to users. So again, the takeaway is finding the balance between functionality and security is critical for the efforts of keeping our operating system secure. Operating systems are unique in that they access every part of the computer system. Therefore, it plays a key role in keeping computer security in place for you, the user, and for organizations as a whole. Operating system vulnerabilities have the capability of opening the entire computer system to cyber attacks. Another reason to take operating system security very seriously. System survivability is the capacity of a system to fulfill its mission in a timely manner in the presence of attacks, failures, or accidents. There are 4 key properties of survivable system. The resistance to attacks, the recognition of attacks and damage, the recovery of essential and full services after an attack, and the adaptation and evolution to reduce effectiveness of future attacks. The levels of protection are dependent on the exposure of the computer system that we are trying to protect. If the computer system is isolated, a set of level of protection steps will be taken that may not be as critical and as high effort as systems that are exposed to the network. And also, we need to take into account the criticality of the system that we are trying to protect. On that particular step, the classification of assets, which was presented in the previous slide, is a critical component. A formal vulnerability assessment is required to identify applicable vulnerabilities and security controls to reduce the risk. These are some of the steps that we discussed earlier today: the asset inventory, the asset classification, the vulnerability assessment, the risk assessment, the risk response, and the implementation of security controls if applicable. The system survivability strategies are as follows. As we mentioned, the first one is the resistance to attacks. And the description for that is the strategies for repelling attacks. We need to make sure that we create strategies for repelling the attacks, the cyber attacks. Example of those strategies include the authentication of users that are trying to access the different assets in our organization, including the operating system, access controls, encryption, message filtering, system diversification, and finally, functional isolation. The second key property of a system is the recognition of attacks and damage. Operating systems need to be capable of recognizing attacks and the damage that comes with those attacks. In that form, strategies for detecting the attacks and evaluating the damage must be created as part of a sound operating system. Strategies to implement that particular property include the intrusion detection and the integrity checking. Another key property is the recovery of essential and full services after an attack. And the description of that particular property involve the strategies for limiting damage, restoring compromised information or functionality, maintaining or restoring essential services within mission time constraints, and restoring full services. Examples of that particular key property include data backups, system backups, backups of the operating system itself, redundant components, meaning placing devices that are of high criticality for our organization in different locations so we can counteract any natural disaster that may impact our organization. If a location in our company is subject to flooding, then we need to make sure that we create a redundant copy of that particular system with its operating system in a different location that is not subject to flooding. Adaptation and evolution to reduce effectiveness of future attacks is the last property that we are discussing. And that involves the strategies for improving systems survivability based on knowledge gained from intrusions. Intrusion recognition patterns is an example of that strategy becoming part of our regular activities in our company. We need to ask what are the most common security threats. There are intentional attacks in the form of denial of service, or DOS, which involves the prevention of authorized access to a system resource or the delaying of system operations and functions, and that is based on the NIST definition. NIST is the organization that provides many different standards in the form of documents that are published for the use of private and public companies in the topics of cybersecurity. Distributed Denial of Service, or DDoS, which is a denial of service technique that uses numerous hosts to perform the attack. Malware is another example of an intentional attack. Malware is a program that is inserted into a system, usually covertly, with the intent of compromising the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the victim's data, applications, or operating system, or of otherwise annoying or disrupting the victim. Virus. A computer program that can copy itself and infect a computer without permission or knowledge of the user. It is important to know that a virus might corrupt or delete data on a computer, use email programs to spread itself to other computers, or even erase everything on a hard disk. Worm. A computer program that can run independently, can propagate within a complete working version of itself into other systems on your network, and may also consume computer resources destructively. Adware and spyware, software that is secretly or surreptitiously installed into an information system to gather information on individuals or organizations without their knowledge, a type of malicious code. Trojan horse, a computer program that appears to have a useful function but also has a hidden and potentially malicious function that evades security mechanisms, sometimes by exploiting legitimate authorizations of a system entity that invokes the program. And finally, another major example of an intentional attack is ransomware, which is defined as a type of malware that attempts to deny access to a user's data, usually by encrypting the data with a key known only to the attacker who deployed the malware, until the company that owns the asset pays the ransom. Finally, there are unintentional, non-malicious events that can also compromise the security of the operating system. Examples include non-synchronized processes that can alter data, the integrity of your asset, and the program or process code errors that are typically part of any development process in the operating system applications. Here we are going to define some of the most important types of viruses that you may have to deal with in your activities as far as protecting the operating system security. The first type of virus that we are going to discuss is the file infector virus. This virus attacks the files, infects the files that reside on a computer, normally executable files. These viruses commonly become resident in memory and then infect any clean executable program that runs on that particular computer. Another type of virus is the boot sector virus. It infects the boot record, the system area of secondary storage, the hard drive. These viruses activate whenever the user powers on the computer system. Master boot record virus is another example or type of virus. It infects the boot record of a disk, saving a legitimate copy of the master boot record in a different location of the volume. Multipartite virus infects both the boot record and program files, making them especially difficult to repair. Successful removal requires that all instances of the virus be removed at once on the boot records, as well as all instances of files infected with the virus. If any instance remains infected, the virus will continue to negatively impact the computer system. Finally, macrovirus. It infects data files such as word processing documents and spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word are typical applications subject to this type of viruses. Computer users are advised to disable the automatic execution of macros on files they don't completely trust. So the next question that you may ask yourself is, what security controls can you implement to protect operating systems? Those include robust system administration, security software controls, backups, and finally user training. For robust system administration, we have the following activities: creation of different computer configurations depending on the classification level given to that particular asset or system. The creation of written policies and procedures to protect computer systems in the form of what software highly critical systems will receive and will be approved to be installed on them. And that particular list will be written in a policy or procedure that is part of the company's documentation. Password management includes the frequent changes of passwords for all the users that are accessing the different computer systems in order to protect and secure operating systems on those systems. Finally, network safeguards. The creation of steps to safeguard the access to the network environment for our organization. At the end of the day, those safeguards will be the ones protecting the operating system residing on our assets. Security hardware and software controls. Antivirus software to combat and remove infections. Installed on every single device that has the capability of receiving those viruses or malware. Firewalls to block non-approved access and to facilitate the logging of traffic activity within our network. Identity and access management. The creation of a resound and secure identity and access management program within our organization that will allow for credentials to be given to employees and users based on the needs, the functional needs they have to access company data. Data encryption, a formal process and software to be used to encrypt data at rest, in use, or in transit. Backups. Backup and recovery includes the frequent testing of the backups, the backup jobs, and the recovery or restore jobs that are part of the software that is used to back up our data. The use of off-site storage for the backups, either in the cloud or in a different physical location if we are still using physical tapes to store our backups. Site redundancy, meaning utilizing a different facility geographically located completely far away from the primary facility that houses all of the data for our company. User training is the final security control that we will discuss, and that includes the training of our users to safeguard all of our systems, including the operating system, against social engineering attacks in the form of phishing or vishing. Finally, training our users on the importance of vigilance. A system is only as good as the integrity of the stored data. And that concludes our review of system security within the operating system, the topic of our course. It is important to review this subject from a holistical point of view, understanding those steps that I mentioned earlier: the identification of assets, the identification of vulnerabilities, the identification of threats, and then conducting a formal risk management process in order to make decisions before we implement security controls. With that said, we covered the system security subject of operating systems, and we are going to talk about system administration next time we meet. Thank you very much.